All right. It's, yeah, technical difficulties, and then actually we got the dreaded strike. So anyway, we'll give it a few minutes, and we will start from the very top on our discussion for mold making tonight. And I am not going to touch a single one of these down here. Matter of fact, I'm even going to remove a few more.
Do you think I'll glue my fingers together?
I hope you did glue your fingers together. Maybe, maybe not. Anyway, that one was a strike on probably, what's your guess, Hayden? The blasters?
Yeah.
I think it was the big.
It's always got to be visuals because you weren't talking.
I did glue my finger to it.
Okay. Ooh. Okay, there you go. Anyway, good thing I have. Thanks, Daryl. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Third time. The problem, one thing I don't like is February 14th stream is going to be in 3 pieces now. That's one thing I don't like. I guess you could go back and put them back together, couldn't you?
Yeah,
Then it would be a separate upload, and then it wouldn't sit in our regular stream. Anyway, it wouldn't chronologically fit anymore because it's an upload and not a live stream. This
is stupid.
Yes. Actually, last week's stream about the mold making and everything got really good numbers. It hits. It did very well. The fact that this is a Star Wars / costuming / blasters / props podcast, and we can't show anything that we're talking about without getting in trouble. It's difficult. It has been difficult, and but we're going to try to figure out a way to make this all work.
We could get Larry on and see how long it takes us to get shut down. I bet it'd be a new record.
Yeah, maybe. But anyway, at this point, I imagine most of our audience is starting to get fed up and just said, you know what, we'll just catch them next week when they do helmets and armor. And forget about black. Because next week is going to be all about helmets and armor. There won't be any blasters being talked about next week.
What about helmet lights?
You know what? If you want to talk about helmet lights, we can talk about helmet lights.
No. We're doing molds. Do molds. I'm just going to build it in front of them and then wow them with it actually kind of working. Because I'm trying to do it so quick.
So anyway, what I was saying before, if you are going to be casting small greeblies like this and this and this is the little these are the little buttons that go on the Mirror Sun Power 5. This is the little control panel that goes on the Mirror Sun Power 5. Here is the disc that goes on the Mirror Sun Power 5. And another one of the little circle greeblies that goes on the Mirror Sun Power 5 right here. Anyway, if you're going to be doing small greeblies like that, a dump mold works great. And we talked about dump molds last week. So let's move on to talking about some more advanced and somewhat difficult molds to make. Traditionally, larger pieces you want encapsulated like these guys down here. Now, I have, it would be easier, to be honest, to cast a lot of these blasters with all the greeblies and everything on them. The problem with that is this blaster and this blaster.
I like that. Can we give away Matt?
What's that?
Well, Valentines they give away for, people who stuck around. We can give Matt away.
We might have one at the end. I don't know what it might be, but we'll figure it. Hayden's over there already. We should have him mic'd because there are funny noises that come over from his side.
We can give away a flask.
Pieces like this, I'm not picking it up because I'm afraid I'm going to get struck again. And pieces like that need to be traditional. Lots of times, traditionally, these were made in 2-part molds, meaning you create a mold box. You fill the mold box with clay, you press your piece in, create a seam all the way around, and then you pour in your silicone or your mold material on one side. Then you flip it all over after it's cured, peel out all the clay. Oh, and there would be registration marks in this also. Now, this is actually how I started. My first DL44s came out of a 2-piece mold. And then you will peel out all the clay and then pour in the second half of the mold. And then once that's done, you have created a 2-part mold that splits like this, and then you peel your piece out of the middle. The problem with that is you destroy a lot of detail, such as the detail that is on the top of these Mausers. You have numbers and markings for the sight elevation markings, and you don't want to have a mold line right down the top of your blaster. And so I have moved to doing a single piece mold, meaning I entirely encapsulate the part in a 1-piece mold, and then using a razor blade and scalpel, I gently cut out
Massage.
I gently cut the item back out of it. And most of my molds, and actually I will show you, this is the Mauser, bullnose Mauser mold. This is the base for the A&H Hero, ESB Stunt, and the Mir Sun Power 5. We're all bullnose blasters. And this is the actual mold. And if you see right here, that is the barrel. And that is how this mold is poured. It is actually poured straight down the barrel. And if you can see, it's very hard to see, but there's a picture of a Mauser drawn out on the box. And that's actually a trick I taught myself, or actually realized that every time you create a mold like this, a 1-piece mold, you should draw out the shape that's in here, because it's going to help you identify like this area right here, which is the front area right here on the Mauser. It's the magazine well. This area here is the most obvious area to capture air bubbles. And I would like to know the orientation of that. So when I cast this, I'll stick my finger over the hole, and then I'll turn it this way and then tap it to allow the air bubbles to move up towards the barrel. And then I'll bring it back up, and then the bubbles will just come up and bloop at the top.
And I got a question about that.
Yes.
So that's an exothermic reaction, meaning that resin gets hot when you mix it together.
Yes, this stuff does not get as hot as like onyx, though. This stuff is not that hot. You really don't even notice how hot it gets.
Because I remember you didn't warn me about that on my first one.
Which ones was it? What were you doing?
I was doing Mando helmet. My first attempt at anything was that Mando helmet.
I remember that.
Where I did really dumb stuff.
You actually...
I talked to you for hours and days.
And you disregarded...
You disregarded everything you had said.
Yes, you disregarded everything I said. And then the next helmet project, you came and decided to hang out and have me help you.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, which is... and was the photo taken from that project that was used in the thumbnail, or the photo on Facebook to promote this particular episode.
Anyway, I had a lot of practice before that. Yeah.
Anyway, I am going to quickly demold this. And I'm not going to show off the blaster, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to show off the shape of this mold. And also, I need a Sharpie, because another rule of thumb on a large mold like this, you want to keep track of every single cast. The reason why is these things will pull almost 100% perfect all the way up to about, I'd say, between 15 and 20 casts. This mold will be almost as good as it was original. After 15 or 20, it degrades, and it doesn't really affect the final product. What it affects is how much time it takes me to clean up.
Well, I got a question.
What's cast? Yes, sir.
Is that different from the amount of time you get out of the dump mold?
Dump molds are kind of the same way. They can start going bad. I did show in the last episode, or we've showed in the past, dump molds when they're going bad, and in general, all these molds when they're going bad, you will actually see where the material, the oils in the latex or the silicone is deteriorating, and it will actually, in this clear, this is dragon skin, by the way. Dragon skin is, I found to be one of the best mold materials out there. I love it. I've been using it for almost the entire time I've been making molds. I did my research early on. I tried materials. It's not cheap. It's very expensive, but it creates a good finished product. And it has nominal shrinkage, meaning the shrinkage of the product of dragon skin. Yes, it is what they use in Hollywood. And dragon skin is also used in, because they call it dragon skin. One reason why they call it dragon skin is it does have a very natural skin feel to it as you rub your fingers across it. And they actually make skins for prosthetic limbs out of this stuff. It has a very natural feel to it, and it's a very durable material. The casting process, although it tends to, the resins pull out the oils in the silicone, and the more brittle the silicone gets, the more it rips and whatnot. But for example, or for demonstration purposes, let's just say this is a freshly poured silicone mold. The box has been pulled away from the mold now, and this is, and what's inside here is my master, even though it's actually a copy. I would take right now, hand me the scalpel. It's right here. I would take my scalpel, and right here where the barrel is poking out, this is actually the bottom of the mold. So when this was poured, it was in this orientation, and it was poured from above. So the pistol grip is right here, and the body of the gun goes down this way. So when this was made, it is harvested from dragon's tears. So anyway, I would start by inserting my razor blade right next to the barrel and then doing a long cut right along like this. And then I would put my thumbs in here really hard and then start cutting down along the barrel, but stretching the silicone away from the master so I can cut it without scratching. I scratched one of my flash suppressors, aluminum flash suppressor, probably 5-6 years ago, and it was a prize item because it was aluminum. It was beautiful. I made it over here on the lathe. It was a beautiful piece, wonderfully perfect machining marks, well done. It was the Bespin flash suppressor, and I put a scratch in it. And the problem was I could not remember when I cast it where the scratch was. I never marked it. So every time I cast it, if I didn't think right, I couldn't get the seam, the mold line close to the scratch. And there were several iterations of Bespin DL44s that actually had an old razor scratch on the top of the flash suppressor, and it should have been on the bottom closer to the seam where I'm going to separate it. So anyway, so once you cut all the way down, you're going to cut deep. I mean, I'm talking, I'm like this, So I've cut everything down from the barrel to the magazine well, around the magazine well, down across the trigger guard, down to the grip, and all the way to where that ring is on the Mausers. Now, the only area left to separate is around the trigger. And I'll stretch it really hard and make a nice, beautiful cut right down the middle of the trigger, hopefully. it doesn't always work out that way. Then this is basically what you end up having. This is a one-piece mold, and by design, the seam line is on the bottom, and even if you can't get the seam line completely cleaned up quickly, you can just leave it because it's on the bottom. No one's going to see it. But the top of the blaster is completely free of any seams or anything like that. And that's why I moved from a two-piece mold to a one-piece mold. The thing is, like I said, the one-piece molds start giving up quality around 15 or 20 pulls. A two-piece mold would last twice as long. That's out, and I'm just gonna slowly slide it that way and tuck it under something else so maybe we won't get struck. But
isn't a two-piece mold also a lengthier process to make?
Two-piece mold is a longer process, and it actually produces a lesser quality piece. My whole thing is about hiding the mold lines. I do not like mold lines, and the part that really inspired me to figure out a way to create is I didn't have any schooling, and when I started doing this in the mid 2000s, there was not a whole lot available online that really helped you. What really helped me the most was watching old how it's done type behind the scenes videos. A lot of that stuff is what really helped me learn a lot. And actually, I don't know if we've talked about this before. I actually had a mentor while I lived in California when I was a teenager, who actually was a prop maker, retired at the time. He was retired in the 80s. So he was involved in a lot of stuff through the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and maybe even early 80s. I never talked to him about certain things. I never asked him, did you work on this or you work for here? And he's like, he did tell me he knew about ILM and a lot of the Straka. Nice to see you, sir.
Welcome back.
He did talk about the buzz about ILM, but he didn't say anything. He was kind of winding down his career, I think, in that period. If we'll have a discussion about him one of these days, but he was a really neat guy. He lived on my street in California, and he got into it totally by accident. He was a World War II vet, and he got into it after the housing market started to dry up. The construction market after the war started drying up in California, and he was offered a job by a friend of his to come to the studios as a carpenter on sets, and his big hobby was model making.
Oh, kind of like Harrison Ford, except not acting.
His big hobby was model making, and he actually ended up doing a lot of those bathtub World War II movies, where the models,
those were awesome.
Yeah. So a lot of those old John Wayne, Robert Mitchum movies, he did models and worked on models for those things. You're just called bathtub models because you can obviously tell they didn't have the water and the scaling and everything figured out.
Yeah, but they slowed everything down so it looked perfect.
They did slow them down, yes. So so that's what he did. And he talked to me a lot. He actually probably sparked a lot of this in me when I was younger. But anyway, this is what a one-piece blaster mold will look like, your master. And as you see right here, this is the mold line, and I'm keeping the mold line on the bottom of the blaster. So it's generally easy to clean up. You can clean all my mold lines up. I don't have anything that has an unacceptable mold line. And I have the least amount of possible mold lines. Some of my molds demold in a way that is difficult because I stop the line and then I have to really force the part out. But in the end, it creates, because I don't want to go into areas that are difficult to conceal, or I don't want it to obscure any of the detail. So anyway, let's get back to I kind of went on a tangent.
Stay on target.
I actually overstepped some of my points, but choosing a mold box, building a mold box, the minimum requirements that I go by are 1/4 of an inch. 1/4 of an inch is the minimum. The optimum, I believe, is 1/2 inch.
Now, what do you mean by that?
Okay, so when you create a mold box, you're going to have a piece such as this drill.
Thing?
Yes, such as this drill, and you measure the drill. So say this right here is from the back spine right here to the end of this is, say, 7 inches, okay? So from here to there, at a minimum, it would be 7.5 inches. That gives you 1/4 of an inch on each end. The optimum would be 8 inches, giving 1/2 inch on each end. Then you measure your height. You figure out what that is. Say it's 6 inches on this, so go 6.5 inches. And then your width, say the width is 2.5 inches, go 3 inches. That gives you, that would give you 1/4. If you wanted to go higher, you can go to, so it's 2.5, 3.5, and that gives you 1/2 inch on each side. Those are the dimensions of your mold box. The construction of your mold box should be like this, or how I found it should work best. That's 7.5, or was it 7.5 inches, or 8 inches? That 8 inches should be within these two sides. So this is 1/2 inch material. So the box, this part of the mold box would be 9 inches to accommodate for the 1/2 inches of the side here. The reason why it's built like this is you don't want to try to exit a mold from this end. You want to have an actual mold like this, and you pull your mold out. Oh, here's the mold right here. And always remember your mold orientation, because even now on this mold, I'll turn it over and say, oh, the box goes on like this. Boom. So it goes in like this, because the seam line is this way, like that. That's how it would go. And then the mold box. So this box is created prior to the mold being poured. The actual piece being cast will be pinned to the floor, which is removable and we'll never use that again. These are bolted in like so, and that's how it sits in an empty box. And when you go to pour, so that is one way of doing the one-piece molds, which are the ones that I do, and those are the most common molds that I use. The second way of doing it is using PVC pipe. Everything you want to do is to optimize ease, repeatability, and lessen the amount of material you're going to use. Those are, because this mold material is actually very, very expensive. It's double per gallon what the resin costs. So I use a lot of PVC pipe. For example, this is an M38 mold, and this one right here is the force pike mold. This is the mold that makes the hilt for the force pike. This is, I believe, 4-inch PVC pipe. And this was the size that I determined which was most optimal for the force pike. Hayden, can you see over in the M38, right behind you, mid-level, all the way to the left, M38, is there a M38 scope in there? All right, you bring me that one. It's not in the traditional resin that I use, but this is one of my M38 scopes. And Rodney, can you tell me, all the beautiful things on top are totally preserved.
It is so beautiful and readable. C80023.
Would you like to take that up to the camera?
I guess. If it starts smoking, it's not my fault.
Okay. So, for example, since I'm afraid to take a gun up to the camera, Rodney is taking an M38 scope, and he's going to show a little bit lower and turn it, angle it, see if we can catch the light. Angle it the other way. All right. Oh, there you go. So anyway, you can see in that traditionally this could have been done or would have been done in a 2-piece mold. There you go. Thank you, Rodney.
You're welcome.
And back in the day, filmmakers didn't care because you were never going to catch this fidelity of a part. But what I tend to create is what I like to call hero versions of all the blasters. These are like the heroes. So I'm trying to get close to, and lots of times the heroes in Star Wars, the hero blasters are actually real blank firing, or actually real firearms that fire blanks. So to get to the hero, you want to eliminate as much of a mold line or any artifacts that show that it's a cast part. And like I said, this is an M38 scope. The M38 scope is oriented inside this tube. It is actually bolted using the original mount bolts exactly like this. I know, I wish it was a black one to show you, but it's sitting in there just like that. And I'm going to pop the mold out real quick. And show you how the mold opens up. Just like that. The mold line on these goes from right underneath here all the way up to this foot, down to the second foot, and all the way out to the end of the front of the scope. And when you set it back in the mold, you have to orientate it so the pore holes will match the pore holes in the PVC pipe. This saves a ton of material by casting this round part in this round piece of PVC pipe. If the other option you have is to actually make a box, and with a box you have all those corners and everything, you're going to lose or waste a lot of material. The PVC pipe is a repeatable pipe. The first pipe will actually get cut. Do you have footage of that? Demolding the SC14 parts? Okay. We're going to get to that because we have some footage of demolding some parts. No, we'll get to it. So I'm actually going to let him. Hayden, we just recently filmed me making the SC14 parts, and I will talk. We're going to just go ahead and play that, and we're going to talk through what's going on the screen. And is there any questions, really?
Cool.
Anytime you have questions, pop them out. All these parts. Actually, you know what? That actually will help carry it along just using the video, don't you think?
Just let it play.
Well, we'll let it play and we'll talk over it. So put us in picture in picture. This is SC14 week before last casting. He's changing the he's changing some sizes and moving some stuff around.
Heck yeah, yeah. What do you think about this?
That looks good, sir.
Okay.
All right, let's go. So what we have here is I'm mixing up silicone. I have really bad carpal tunnel, so silicone mixing is miserable for my hands. You are supposed to vigorously mix by hand for a minimum of, I think, 3 or 4 minutes. So I actually mixed it with an egg beater on a drill, basically is what I did. This on certain molds, this is dragon skin, and I use a dragon skin slow because I like to have plenty of time to work with the material. This is degassing the material. I like to degas the material even though to a certain point I don't have to, and I haven't always done it, but here lately I've been degassing all of my silicone that I have time to degas. This is pouring the mold box or pouring the mold for the SE14. Now, when you're pouring a mold, the silicone is heavy. And if you're not careful, an item such as this guy right here, he's going to be pinned right here on this. If you come down with too much material, you can cause the part to shift in the mold. And it's happened to me. The weight of the silicone can actually cause the silicone to move the part in the mold box. Right now, we've gone from, go ahead and pause it right there, Hayden. Just leave it on screen, but pause it. So what we've done is I have mixed up and completely poured the mold box for the receiver for the SE14, just like I would pour for the Mauser or the Henry survival rifle right here.
AR-7.
And the AR-7, yes. Do you know I was using a James Bond movie? The first one?
No.
From With Russia with Love. I discovered that last night. I'm watching the movie and I was like, holy cow, I know that gun. Anyway, the silicone's heavy. And if the part is not properly secured, or is secured in the best way you can, but it's kind of like, the silicone, the weight of the silicone can cause that part to shift, and you don't want that. So there are two parts. There's several things you need to understand about pouring silicone. Even though I degassed, I do what's called a long pour, meaning I pour in a long pour. What a long pour does is it causes the silicone to stretch out, and that actually helps pop any trapped air bubbles during the pouring process. So a tall pour is beneficial. And also the way you pour, you do want to pour so the material runs down and around the part. And one benefit to doing that is that also causes a good coating, but it also, as the material flows down, it also helps to relieve air bubbles. Here right now, I am scraping the bottom of the barrel. For all you people that are, some orders are behind, the reason why your order is behind is the Mirsun Power 5 molds were not able to be made because I ran out of material on this pour or on this project. This is actually being filmed at the latter half of pouring. I'd already poured almost 60 ounces at this point. So, and we're going back to gassing. I degas every time the material allows it. I use Dragon Skin slow, so it takes like a full 24 hours for a complete cure. So that allows me plenty of time. I think the working time on it is, I don't even know what it is. Oh, stop right here. Pause. Now, that part, that's the SE14 receiver. It went in, I poured all that material. I vacuumed all of the air out of the silicone, and I poured it into that box. And what you see right there is that has been sitting in the pressure pot for about 10 or 15 minutes. And what it's done, the second way that I work is I vacuum out the gas or degas, then I pour, and then I pressure cast the mold. And what that does is any new air or any air that's left is going to be trapped. And then when you compress it, it goes into a really tight bubble that has the ability now to actually move up and punch its way up to the top of the silicone. Because a regular air bubble without any atmosphere, like adding 60 pounds of pressure, causes the air to force into a tight very dense pocket of air, and that's going to be able to force its way through the silicone. If you tried to cure at atmosphere pressure, those bubbles would not have the ability to come to the surface at regular atmosphere pressure, because they're not condensed enough to overcome the friction of the silicone. And what you're seeing at the top, before the pressure pot was opened, all those bubbles you're seeing there at the top that are now big were probably the size of a pinhead originally, and now they're at the top, and we've opened them up, and now they're spreading out and popping. They eventually would pop anyway, but that's just a cool example of air that was trapped in the silicone that is now expanded up again. Go ahead and hit play. So what we're doing, yeah, see how they're coming now to the surface and popping? Yeah, I love that. Pressure curing is an important step, I think. You can get away with not pressure curing, and to be honest, a pressure pot this size, that's a 10-gallon pressure pot, that is actually difficult to find. Those are kind of hard to find. Right now, I'm just pouring the last. In this pour, we did the SC14 receiver, and we did the SC14 butt cap and muzzle. Are the two things we did.
That's like a long pour.
That is a long pour. The longer coming down to the end, but yes, you want to do it. Like I said, you do the long pour to help the bubbles come out. Or help break any air bubbles in it. Right now, I'm taking the last of the material, and I'm trying to pour the scope, or not, I'm sorry, the bolt for the SC14. We didn't make it. And you'll actually see me trying to actually remove a little material from the SC14 to finish that. And it just didn't happen. But I still pressure cured it, because what sticks to silicone best?
Silicone.
More silicone. So that's not a lost cause.
Couldn't you have just added caulk to it?
No, we're not adding caulk. But so I still have yet to pour the other half of the SC14 scope, but I have it cleaned off and protected to keep it clean. And I am 100% confident that when I do finish pouring that, the silicone I pour in will perfectly adhere to the silicone that's already in there, and it will make a perfectly fine mold that will last forever. Now I'm demolding. This is either a butt cap or the flash suppressor. But when you do a PVC, use PVC as your mold box or tube, you're going to have to cut a new piece of PVC to get to house that part. Now, right here, we're talking about, remember earlier I was talking about how to cut the parts out using a razor knife and or a scalpel.
Now, if your mold was thick enough, you wouldn't need the PVC pipe, would you?
Technically, yes, but technically also no. You have to close the mold back up. And since the PVC pipe is the perfect diameter to hold that mold closed, you reinsert the PVC, you insert the silicone mold back into the PVC, and it acts as a mother mold and closes up the gaps, the seams. The reason why this works, this process works, is because dragon skin, like I said, has a nominal shrinkage. Like it shrinks so little, it's hard to measure. So the part you cast, or the part that you make a mold of, and then the resin part you cast from that mold is almost within such a fine measurement different that it's not worth measuring, if you know what I mean. Like the idea of this part and the butt and the muzzle is they fit on the end of this particular piece of PVC pipe perfectly, and they fit almost exactly as actually fit, in my perception, exactly the way the original pieces fit on there. And since there's nominal shrinkage, meaning, like I said, the shrinkage is so minor that it's really difficult to measure, you don't have any problem putting it back in the exact same diameter PVC pipe to hold it closed for pouring pouring the verge. Because if you didn't put it back in the pipe, it wouldn't close shut that gap. And you would have a fat mold line. You could pour it and just its own weight hold it semi-shut, but you would have a ridiculous mold line. The actual mold line, I'll show you on the first pulls, which are right here. Check out the mold lines on that. Yeah. Exactly.
You clean these up?
Right
here?
There it is. You found it.
Only because I'm used to looking for this crap?
Yeah. No one else would ever care.
Nobody else would. And this one's right here.
Yes.
It's a little more pronounced, but not much.
But those mold lines, now, with time, the mold line, the silicone mold will stretch and the mold line will get more pronounced. But for your first batch of pulls, these mold lines, I'd say the mold lines are going to look like that for at least the first 15 to 20 pulls. And that is beautiful. I mean, these are very nice, very well done. Like that mold line right there, this is more pronounced than a mold line. The mold line on this one, there it is right there. And all you do when you put the blaster together is to orientate the mold lines on the bottom. And you don't even have to really fix them.
You need a special effect when you do that.
Bloop, bloop. Oh, but anyway, they're designed to fit snugly on here. Pretty snug.
It's a tube build.
Yeah, it is a pipe build. This is going to be a pipe build blaster. But does heat or cold affect the molds? Yeah, well, with molds, yes, just about anything that will heat up in contrast. But you know what really affects through temperature more than anything is your cure times on your molds and actually on your resin cast pieces.
What's the liquid? The resin.
What do you mean by is it in the liquid state?
When he's pouring it in.
Yes. On silicone, it will do any. Sorry, sir. Sorry. I got to look. I got a look of death. On silicone, it will just, it's already thick as molasses. So just think of what happens to molasses in the wintertime. So silicone will slow down and its cure time will slow down and its flow rate will also slow down a lot. And for silicone, it's already very slow. What makes silicone flow is weight. When you get a lot of silicone, it'll flow fast because it'll build up speed heading down the your pour cup. But here's funny thing is you'll have up to 1/4 inch of silicone all around the inside of the cup that's barely moving. That's why when you run your paddle, your paint stick or your whatever mixing stick around the edge of the silicone, and you can see in some of the earlier footage that we were showing, when I zipped it through and pulled it out, I had a whole giant tongue depressor full of silicone because it just sticks to the walls. The weight of it is what makes it flow. And once the volume of it is out, you really got to work it out of the cup. And the temperature, really, the biggest thing about temperature is cure times. Even though the basement's a little bit chilly, it's still probably what do you think down here? 75 degrees. So it's it's still, we maintain a decent temperature down here. We maintain about the same temperature you want to maintain in your house in the summertime in the basement. So
Also, mixing it correctly affects.
yes. Most of the materials I use, I always opt to use the 1-to-1 materials for two reasons. One, I get more material out of a 1-to-1 as I do.
A 1 gallon kit nets you 2 gallons of
Yeah,
material.
a 1 gallon kit gets you 2 gallons of mixed material. A 2-to-1 kit means it's a gallon and a half gallon mixed together. What do you got? Gallon and a half. And lots of times the cost is still exactly the same.
Well, it was like Larry training that guy. Then he made the mold. It was going to be an expensive mold.
Yeah.
And then Larry came up and was trying to figure out why it wasn't curing.
Mm-hmm.
Just because it was a 2-part material that he only put the silicone in there to save the other material. He got fired.
Oh. So another thing about pressure curing, when you pressure cure a mold, the optimal way of using that mold, now granted, all of my open-faced dump molds are all pressure cured, but they're not always, the parts that are made in them are not always pressure cured. But on some of these larger type of items, it's almost a rule for me. Everything that's pressure, if a mold is pressure cured, the parts that are being made in that mold will also have to be pressure cured. And the reason why is, if any air still exists in that mold, even though it doesn't affect the performance of the mold, or the longevity or whatever, it can still cause a deformation in your part because the air bubble is expanding at atmosphere pressure as opposed to being under pressure at 60 psi. So I don't ever really notice any air bubbles, but just as a rule of thumb, these parts are all cast under pressure to make sure the mold functions the way it was cured. If it was cured under pressure, that means its optimum function is going to be under pressure. So that's why I do it. And that's not the only reason. It also shrinks any air bubbles that get caught in your casts and shrinks them down.
Ever seen a part that is made and it's got that kind of
Pimple
sponge look
or pimply look or whatever? Yeah. Matter of fact, you will actually not find that in almost any of my casts. You will not find a whole array of tiny air bubbles everywhere. What you will find occasionally, though, is one big fat air bubble, and that's because I pressurized it, and every piece of air all culminated in one spot and created one big air bubble.
It's because all the air comes from Matt.
Well, yeah. No. Lots of parts, like I said, lots of parts are tricky. When you make a mold, every mold has a trick and a way of burping air out of it. Another reason for pressure curing is when you pressure cure, it makes sure that there is no air in the mold. And I've made molds without pressure curing the mold. Before I actually had a pressure pot big enough to do like in the Mauser mold and everything, you could actually, every time I pull the mold apart, I can actually see bubbles in the mold. And as time goes by, those areas wear out faster and the life of the mold is extremely short. Just the fact of actually having air trapped in your silicone mold shortens its life. It does several things. It shortens its life, dulls detail. A pressure cured mold has sharper detail that lasts longer, and overall the molding is going to last a lot longer. Right now, what I'm doing here is removing the mold box from a freshly cured mold. And this is probably the most dangerous part besides cutting the part actually out of the mold.
Well, let's go back to silicone for a minute. The reason you use
Go ahead.
silicone is because
Pause.
you get such a good print from it.
Yes, the silicone. I have an MG34 that's a World War II era MG34, and one of the things I always point out to people is at one point a time, a German soldier cleaned this gun, probably with gasoline, and softened the bakelite. And by doing this, by cleaning it improperly, he softened the bakelite and left his thumbprint in the bakelite. And when I cast the DL19 out of that mold, a lot of people, when I show them, when they get their blaster and it's like, oh, this is beautiful, this is awesome, I was like, I want to show you something real quick. And I tell them a story. Somewhere along the line, during World War II, a German soldier used something wrong, and I usually say it's probably gasoline, which is probably the most available thing, to someone to clean the gun with. He cleaned it with gasoline and softened the bakelite, and in the process left his thumbprints. I noticed, because this gun, when I got that machine gun from, it was still wrapped in cosmoline. I mean, it hadn't been unwrapped. You remember when, because you were down here with me when we were WD-4ing and softening up the cosmoline and scraping it off. And that's when we discovered the thumbprint in the grip. So that thumbprint is left over by a German soldier from World War II in the machine gun that I have, that is the base of my DLT-19s. And everyone that has a DL-19 of mine has that same thumbprint from 70-something, 80 years ago.
Can we call him Fritz?
We can call him Fritz if you want. But anyway, demolding. This is a kind of a difficult process because the silicone does like to grab onto the wood. Personally, the easiest wood or easiest boxes to make are out of plastic or even out of MDF. Although MDF and the plastic doesn't last that long, and usually the plastic breaks during the demolding process. So just cheap, regular old plywood is my go-to, even though the silicone loves grabbing a hold of that stuff. So what I do is I unbolt the top, shove a screwdriver down between the lid and the sides, and then use a putty knife to help separate the mold from the lid. And then as I'm doing that, I also drop baby powder on it, because baby powder, silicone is naturally very sticky. And throwing the silicone on there takes away the stickiness. When you're cutting PVC pipe to get free your silicone mold, all those PVC pipe or that PVC cutting shavings, they stick to the mold. And then to actually get those pieces off, you just lather it up with baby powder, and that will cause those pieces to fall off and create a non-sticky surface.
Now I got a question about the baby powder.
Yes.
I noticed that in between your pores, you put baby powder to the mold. Why is that?
Okay. Baby powder has this very funny thing. It's not a release agent. So, a lot of people say, oh, it helps you release your molds and this and that. Actually, no, it's not. It doesn't help release the part. The baby powder is porous and actually attracts anything moist or liquidy. And actually what the baby powder really does, and the real benefit of the baby powder, is it draws, it helps. Oh, here's more, here's more, here's more. It helps pull material into spaces, and it helps pull material into recesses like the bolt interface and the extractor on this particular blaster. It helps pull material into recesses and into detail. And that's what baby powder, that's the benefit of the baby powder. It creates a surface that is Well, one, it goes down into each and every crevice of a mold. And by doing that, it actually helps attract the material into that surface and draw it into the detail. And that's really why we use the baby powder. It doesn't really, in the end, it's not really a mold release or helped. What it really does is help draw material into the detail of the mold. That's what it's for. Silicone, unless you're casting a silicone part from a silicone mold, you really don't need a mold release. The one benefit you would get from a mold release on silicone and using urethane resin like I do is it extends the life of the mold. But as you can see, most silicone release agents are aerosol-based spray-ins. Not like fiberglass. Most of your release agents you use for fiberglass are brushed on petroleum wax type stuff. Like, we use the Minwax wood paste and all that kind of stuff. On silicone molds, that stuff doesn't work and doesn't work that well. You want a spray in type, but how are you going to adequately spray and release a mold like this? It's almost impossible. So it's a trade-off. This mold has a finite life, but during its finite life, it will reproduce the highest quality replica you can get without actually having an original. Matter of fact, I have early pictures that I used to show. It's like, okay, here's a picture of them. Here's Exhibit A and Exhibit B. Which one is the original? And literally at that point, it is a 50-50.
You could make that into a game.
We could. Which one is the original? Is this the original? Yeah, regardless. But the baby powder is there as it's there to help the resin find the detail. Is really what it does. That's its real benefit. It absolutely in no way, shape, or form actually is used as a mold release. It also does have its benefits, and it takes the tack out of the silicone mold. So it does do that. It takes the tack out of the silicone mold, which helps you release it from its mold box or whatever. And then once you powder the mold itself, you'll shake it around. Well, I'll dump a bunch of powder in, shake it around, and then I'll open the mold up and then shake and get as much of that out. Because all I want is what's coating the surface. Every once in a while, I'll mess up and there'll be too much. There'll be like a little residual of baby powder down in the bottom. Too much baby powder, guess what? It won't absorb resin. Which it's kind of a funny thing, but yeah, that's the way it works.
So it ends up like cookies that I bake?
It ends up with you pulling this thing
Where you take that bite out of it and it's full of powder.
It has this chalky white, not really quite an air bubble. It's kind of different.
You want me to light your hat?
Do you want to? Is that ready to light up?
Oh, hell yeah.
So this is what Rodney's been doing. Rodney's been making helmet projects, lighting for helmets. Actually, there you go. Oh, see, I want it that way.
Yeah, that goes down.
There you go. Ooh, no, it works better. Up under like that.
Oh, that's cool.
So these are for what?
The Halo.
Halo project.
November Black.
November Black. Anyway.
The movie project.
Yeah, you can talk about it. Matter of fact,
I don't know anything. I just get called and told to do stuff.
This is what we need. Do it, Rodney. Any questions as we're going along? Although I understand tonight was a difficult night and we're running long already. So, Hayden, do you think I need to add more?
We're not even a quarter way through.
I know. We got a lot of material. We had a lot of material. Keep playing that beautiful bean footage. So anyway, right here, I am demolding. We talked about it before. Go ahead and go ahead and fast forward through the. Oh, there we go. So one of the other things is there's going to be trailings and flashing left over. You got to clean all that stuff up. You'll see me clean it up after I even get it out. I'll run a pair of scissors around the edges. The worst one is the last panel by itself because there's nothing to actually pry and push against. This type of plywood I actually hate, but it's what I had online or had available at the time when I was making this. Now, what you're seeing now is what I was talking about before, cutting the part out of the mold. I'm not super careful at this point about touching the sides or touching parts of the casting, because what I'm actually hitting are the wood pour spouts that I've created for this item, which is the SE14 receiver. What I do not want to do is actually cut the receiver master itself. And there we are down to, you can see the grip, the bottom of the grip. And hopefully here in a second, there you go. See, I'm showing off. I'm tracking what I'm doing by putting it up to the light.
So I noticed that you're not cutting in a zigzag pattern to
I
act as
am not
registration.
cutting in a zigzag pattern because I rely on the mold box to help reorientate. And I am not completely cutting the ends all the way around. So I am allowing... Man, that's such... you have no idea how much force it takes to hold that silicone apart and make those cuts without damaging anything.
Are you talking to me or them?
No, yeah. Well, for anybody, because Hayden sits here with me, and he knows how many breaks I have to take because my hands are totally worn out. But anyway, I'm about ready to free the lower receiver for the SE14. And as you can see, as I'm pulling apart, the silicone actually rises up. And what I'm doing, I'm just touching the silicone and allowing it I'm letting it rise up and I'm cutting it. And you know what? Every time I do this, this is a weird thing. Have you ever seen footage of them stripping the blubber off of whales?
Yes.
That is what's going through my head when I'm doing this. It is the weirdest thing because in my mind, it's the cutting looks exactly the same as you cut that silicone and you're breaking that tension of the silicone and it like spreads open as you cut it.
Sam, you're a weird dude.
I know.
Did they get that? Did they get that joke?
Yeah, he did not. It's basically that's what Star Trek 4.
No, that was Hell Comes Frog Down.
I know that's how it comes to Frogtown, but Star Trek 4 with the whaling footage.
Oh yeah.
Anyway, now it's been freed and I've reassembled the mold box. Can we pause? Take a quick break. Because we've been going a lot longer than planned.
So I guess I'm here to entertain you.
There's my foot.
That is your foot. For light. See, what happens is we're using a 5-volt power supply like this that you would charge your phone. The problem is that we're using 12-volt neon that would go in your car, which is not supposed to be cut, but you can cut it. All right? So the problem is we have to make that 5-volt go to 12-volt, which you can do.
How did you make it do that?
Because you use a buck booster, otherwise known as a DC to DC converter.
This is like, Mr. Science.
Yes.
Mr.
It's
Wizard.
Magic.
This is Mr.
Magic.
Wizard.
And instead of doing my usual crap that I used to do back in the day where I build it with all different parts, I got boards, which is way easier and quicker.
So I'm going to quickly go over my notes. Huh? You're about done?
No, we're not done.
Oh, as per my notes. I went over pressure cure.
That was early.
Forces out any remaining air bubbles. Stronger, longer lasting mold. Sharper detail on finished part. We did that. If a mold is pressure cast, we've done that too. If you pressure cast the mold, pressure cast the cast parts. That's actually, That is one of my rules. And I've actually struggled with this because, like the DLT-19, the MG34, that is a large mold. That mold cost, that original, here's the thing. I have never made a profit on the DLT-19, and I've been making DLT-19 for 8 years. And the real reason is A, the cost of the MG34, and B, the cost of the mold itself was half the cost of purchasing a 1943 MG34. And the two together, I have yet to show a profit on that blaster, just for the fact that the mold is so expensive and the original prop was also, or original master was that expensive. So we were on demolding. That was where we were at, right, sir? So we're on demolding. Be careful not to scratch the surface. Create a seam line. Here's one of the big important things. Create your seam line where it's the least visible, but you still got to get the part out. So you're going to have to create a seam line. On Mausers, the seam line stops right here. It stops at this little loop.
So I got a question.
On this one, it used to stop right back here where you couldn't see it. Now it's going to stop right here because this is going to be cast as part of the original. Because, like I said, in 7-8 years of making DL21s, I've actually only done 2 Ponda Babas.
So I understand the making the mold and pouring into it. So here's my question.
Yes.
How through that process do you keep the trigger guard?
Okay, well, I was speaking earlier, and it's hard to see in the SC14 demolding, but once the main parts like this along here and along here is freed, the last thing that gets freed is the trigger area. And the reason why it's like that is because I need to be able to stretch that trigger way, that void of where the trigger's at. I need to stretch that way out so I can find what I hope is the middle and then cut open that middle and then free the trigger. Because when you demold, when you cut out all along here, the trigger and the interior of the trigger guard, that is all still captured. There are tricks and techniques that I've used in the past. Even on this one right here, you can see an artifact of masking tape all along here because this was masking taped to create a masking tape wide barrier between the trigger. And so this whole area here was taped all along here, and that tape was pushed down on the trigger. So in theory, when you pull it apart, it worked great. It worked great for a little while, but after time, there is a misalignment there. And what I decided, after I used to attempt to do stuff like that, to not do it anymore. It's actually easier just to create a new seam line, create the seam line when you're demolding it and just be done with it. And sometimes it works out great. Sometimes you go off course and you have an issue like that. That's not a big issue. That's just basically a weird flashing issue. And if you see that mold line, that cut line comes right along there and then goes right into that damn thing. On this guy here, you can see the mold line. Well, the mold line is easy to hide on this one, but you see it's square down the middle. And if you look, that mold line is square down the middle. Yeah. So sometimes it's not a failure. It just means you got to do a little more cleanup. This one is much cleaner than that one. And I know what happened on this one. I had an idea that moving it along this line, this edge, trying to get it right on the edge would mean just a quick, here's the edge, sandpaper, gone.
And keep in mind with your bucks or your pieces.
And honestly, what I learned is right down the center, like I've always been doing it, works best. And I'm not gonna. Next time I do this one, it's gonna go right down the center. That doesn't take away from this. All it takes away from it is it gives me more things to do to clean it up when I build the blaster.
Now, did you ever go over, you need that perfect if you make like a 3D print before you cast it? Otherwise, you end up with those artifacts in it?
Yes, I absolutely remove every artifact of, well, none of these items on the table are have any 3D printed masters.
No, but our viewing audience, that seems to be the easiest thing for them to do.
Your Proton Pack
Yeah.
project has lots of 3D printed parts.
Yes.
And your 3D printed parts, and you know me because most of my helmet bases, before I build the helmets and make them what they are going to end up being in the final, are still 3D prints to begin with. And I do have 3D prints. I have 3D files that I purchased and have an arrangement with the original owner of those 3D files that I can reproduce those in resin or vac forming. So what do we need to get to? Casting? Huh? All right, we're going to finish up. We're going to wrap up. So basically, when you're demolding your seam line, you want it in the least obvious place, which obviously you would have figured out in the orientation of way you cast the thing. When you're casting a gun, it's very easy. Barrel, pour down the barrel, go down, and then cut along the bottom, and that's great. Scopes and other things are a little bit more difficult, but it still ends up being the same thing. Always make the seam line on the bottom. Now, one-piece molds as opposed to two-piece molds. A two-piece mold will last 2 to 3 times longer, but will have an obscuring mold line through your detail, like your serial numbers and all that stuff on the top, like, those pictures you made of the Bespin DL44 with how well the white paint was in the writing and everything, and how not, you can't have that with a two-piece mold. A one-piece mold, so a two-piece mold will probably make 50 of these, maybe 60. A one-piece mold will maybe make 25, outside 30. But those last 10, you're doing a lot of cleanup, and it adds to your labor when you're trying to put something together. So sometimes getting the most out of the part means getting the least out of the mold, which is standard trade-off. And that's the trade-off I've been going. I want the best part, and I want the best mold. So the best mold makes the best part, but the mold for the part I want will give me the least amount of finished parts or quality parts. And here in the end, the reason why a lot of you guys get a lot of these free blasters is every new mold has its tricks and techniques for getting the air out and making a good quality casting. So that's why I always give away my first castings, is because they're my first casting of a lot of these. Now, I've learned and have a lot of experience, so sometimes that doesn't home true as it used to. But back in the day, the first casting was always the worst casting that came out of it, because it did not have I didn't have the knowledge of how the mold was going to perform. And as you see there, I was tracing out the part, the SC14. I was tracing it out on the mold box. The reason why I trace it out on the mold box is I want to know the orientation of the parts, and visually I can tell where those parts are going to be trapping air, and that's what I'm doing. And what we're doing now is just going into the very first casting of the SC14 lower receiver. I don't even know how much this is going to hold. So when I pour it, I am actually going to take a note of how many ounces it took to fill that up, so I can actually write that on the box. So I will know in the future when I'm casting the SC14 lower receiver, I know how many ounces I have to absolutely mix. There's
do that with water beforehand?
Yeah, but why would you want to have to dry out a mold? Just go ahead and mix up a bunch of material. You got to make one anyway. Have extra molds on hand and dump molds on hand. So for the butt cap and the muzzle, they both took 2 ounces, roughly 2 ounces. I think the actual SE14 receiver took 12 ounces, which is the exact same amount as a Mauser takes. So anyway, let's do a quick review. We're going to finish up the night because we've gone very long tonight. Next week, we're going to be working on helmet molds and larger armor type molds. There's going to be open molds. There's going to be some slush casting, all that kind of stuff going on. Also, the contest this month, it's going to be on the 28th. It's going to be Family Feud, and the winner gets this Return of the Jedi DL44, Han Solo DL44. And check it out on Etsy coming up very quickly, maybe after tonight, maybe tomorrow. DL21, Hoth, and Return of the Jedi will be available. By the end of the week, we should have the DT12, Greedo, and Jawa versions also available. Anything else you would like to add, Senior Captain?
I'm still waiting for my fish superpowers.
Oh, yeah. I didn't even bring this up. This should have been done in intro. Rodney got a skin graft on his foot today.
Really?
Congratulations. They used fish parts.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Matt actually, he did a spit take when I said, because his insurance originally wasn't going to handle it, cover it. And I said, well, what happens if Rodney shows up with a bluegill? It's like, will this work?
I found a trout.
Anyway. We hope to see you next week. I hope this was all informative. I hope is a little disjointed because we've had terrible luck tonight.
The B-roll's not even over.
And the B-roll's not even over. Let's go ahead and pull it out. Let's see what it looks like when we pull it out. I was very pleased and very happy. This is the very first pull of this part. There were some air bubbles. I learned a lot about this first pull. There it is. It is very beautiful. It actually is a very nice part. And we stuffed the new first pull muzzle and butt caps with the mock-up barrel we've been using for about a year and a charging lever in there. Sadly, we didn't have a bolt. So the bolt needs to be finished. The only 2 parts that need to be cast besides finishing the bolt is the scope mount and what's the other? Oh, the rear sight. The rear sight is the other piece that needs to be cast.
Now you can close it.
And now Hayden tells me I can close out. Good night, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Bye.
And happy Valentine's Day.
Bye-bye.